Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This question relates to the proposals for a new Chinese embassy at Royal Mint Court. As the case is currently before the Department for consideration, and due to Minister's statutory role in the planning process, it would be entirely inappropriate for me to comment further on this live case. And I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I will be required to state the following ad nauseam, that ministers will take all material planning considerations into account when the final decision is made, and ministers will inform the House of the decision accordingly.
In fairness, as you brought me into it by saying, as I will know about planning, absolutely. But I didn't choose for you to be the minister that answered this. I would have thought, actually, it would have been the Home Office and the Security Minister. So please, Alicia Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very disappointing to get a technocratic history lesson rather than answer to the meaningful question.
Exactly.
208 secret rooms and a hidden chamber just 1 metre from cable serving the City of London and the British people. That is what the unredacted plans tell us that the Chinese Communist Party has planned for its new embassy if the government gives them the go-ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Shadow Minister. I cannot comment on individual aspects of the case. It would be entirely inappropriate for me to comment on any matter of national security or on behalf of the security services.
Point of order, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the start of the urgent question, Mr. Speaker made it clear that he was surprised that a minister was being put up who would not be able to answer questions, being a planning minister, rather than a security minister being put up who would be able to answer questions. In my 28 years in this House, I've attended many ministerial statements and the questioning that follows, and many urgent questions since they were introduced. Never before has there been an occasion that I have seen where every question asked on both sides of the House was deeply hostile, as it was today, about what the government was proposing to do.
Point of order, Alicia Cairns. I'm assuming it's on a very similar subject.
It is indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. With due respect to the Minister, I submitted this urgent question as the Shadow National Security Minister to the Home Office for the Security Minister to answer. How do we in this House get answers on the focus that we have? Because all questions bar 2 were on national security in this chamber, not on planning. And when, particularly, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the more than capable and diligent Security Minister is forced to sit on those benches silent while his colleague attempts to answer those questions that should be being allowed to be put to him.
Can I thank both Right Honourable and Honourable members for their points of order? As they will know, and the Right Honourable gentleman made a very salient point of his long-standing experience in the House. The choice of minister and responding department is a matter for the government, not for the chair. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, and I are rightly frustrated and understand the frustrations that members have. The government front bench has heard those concerns and might reflect upon it. Of course, the Honourable Lady is perfectly free, as is every member, to resubmit an urgent question on this matter, but obviously I cannot comment on whether that will be granted or not. That will be a matter for Mr. Speaker.
The opening moments of this encounter do not begin with confrontation, but with something far more telling: procedural control. What we see in the early sequence is a carefully managed environment where authority is exercised not through volume or force, but through structure, rules, and the strategic use of limitation. The atmosphere is formal, yet strained, and that tension matters. It sets the tone for everything that follows. A minister is positioned to answer a question that carries weight far beyond its surface framing. The topic involves a proposal that touches on foreign influence, national infrastructure, and the intersection between security and governance. But instead of clarity, the response immediately retreats behind process. Language becomes a shield. References to statutory roles, live cases, and planning frameworks replace engagement with substance. This is not a failure of eloquence. It is a deliberate narrowing of what can be discussed. Authority, here, is exercised by defining the boundaries of conversation. That initial narrowing creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum steps frustration. The chamber reacts not because a rule has been broken, but because the rules are being used to avoid something everyone present knows is central. The distinction between planning and security is technically valid, but contextually hollow. When the stakes are framed around national vulnerability, infrastructure proximity, and foreign state intentions, refusing to engage on security grounds while sitting in a position of power appears less like compliance and more like evasion. This is where the first power shift occurs. Not loudly, not dramatically, but structurally. When a question is asked in a forum designed for accountability, and the response is an assertion of procedural inappropriateness, the burden subtly shifts. It moves away from the official to the system itself. The system becomes the thing being questioned. The minister is no longer just a person answering. They become the embodiment of an institutional choice to withhold. As another voice enters, the tension sharpens. The details being raised are not abstract. They are specific, technical, and alarming in their implications. The mention of physical proximity to critical infrastructure reframes the entire exchange. Suddenly, this is not about zoning or blueprints. It is about vulnerability. Yet again, the response is a refusal, cloaked in propriety. National security is cited as a reason not to discuss national security. It is a paradox that highlights a recurring pattern in power structures. The more consequential a subject becomes, the more it is fenced off. What makes this moment compelling is not the disagreement, but the mismatch. On one side, members of the chamber are operating in the realm of consequence, trying to force the issue into the open. On the other, the official response is anchored in jurisdictional boundaries. These two realities are speaking past each other, and that disconnect is where accountability begins to erode. Then, a procedural intervention changes the tone. A point of order is raised, and in that act, something important happens. A long-serving member invokes institutional memory, not to argue about the policy itself, but to question the legitimacy of the process unfolding. This is not emotional. It is not theatrical. It is measured, almost restrained. But it carries weight precisely because it is rooted in experience. When someone who has seen decades of similar exchanges states that this one is different, that this one is unusually hostile and unusually blocked, it reframes the entire scene. This is why the selected opening clip matters. In that brief window, the quiet machinery of power becomes visible. The frustration is no longer individual. It is collective. Members from different sides converge on the same observation. The questions being asked are not being answered, not because they lack merit, but because the structure of who is allowed to speak has been manipulated. The authority of the chair, however, remains formally intact. The response that follows is calm, procedural, and correct in the narrowest sense. The choice of which minister stands at the dispatch box is framed as the prerogative of the government. That is true. But truth and justice are not always aligned. What is legally permissible is not always democratically sufficient. And in that gap, public trust begins to strain. This is a classic pattern in institutional breakdowns. No single rule is violated. No single actor behaves outrageously. Instead, a series of small, technically defensible decisions accumulate into a larger outcome. Meaningful scrutiny is prevented. The security minister remains seated. The planning minister remains constrained. The questions remain unanswered. And the chamber, despite its formal power, is rendered temporarily ineffective. What makes this moment resonate is how quietly it unfolds. There is no shouting. There are no dramatic gestures. Just a steady recognition that something fundamental has gone wrong. The forum designed to extract truth has been redirected into a procedural loop. Members are told they can try again later, resubmit, hope for a different outcome. But in the moment that matters, the opportunity for accountability has been deferred. This is not just about one proposal or one embassy. It is about how systems protect themselves when challenged. By routing sensitive issues through administrative bottlenecks, institutions can appear transparent while remaining opaque. The language of process becomes a substitute for the substance of oversight. As the first phase of this encounter closes, the lines are clearly drawn. On one side, elected representatives attempting to surface a security concern of national significance. On the other, an executive structure that has chosen to engage only on its own terms. The tension does not dissipate. It lingers, unresolved, setting the stage for everything that follows. And that is the real hook. Not the controversy itself, but the realization that even in the heart of a democratic chamber, power can still find ways to avoid being fully seen. When the rules are used not to reveal, but to obscure, the question is no longer what is being built, but who is being protected. By the time the chamber reaches the procedural deadlock, the real conflict is no longer about bricks, buildings, or even foreign embassies. It has become a conflict about visibility. Who is allowed to speak, who is allowed to answer, and who is permitted to define what counts as relevant. The structure of authority has quietly shifted from serving scrutiny to insulating itself from it. What follows the initial exchange is not escalation in volume, but escalation in stakes. Members of the chamber are no longer just dissatisfied. They are formally registering that something has gone wrong with how power is being exercised. The point of order is not a technical interruption. It is an institutional alarm. It signals that the usual pathways for accountability have failed to function. This matters because democratic systems do not collapse when rules are broken. They weaken when rules are followed in ways that defeat their purpose. Every procedural defense raised here is technically correct. A planning minister truly is limited in what they can say. National security considerations genuinely restrict disclosure. The chair truly does not control which minister appears. But when all of these truths align in a way that blocks every meaningful question, the result is a form of bureaucratic paralysis that protects the executive from oversight. The long-serving member's intervention is especially powerful because it is not ideological. It is empirical. He is not arguing from outrage, but from precedent. In decades of parliamentary experience, he has never seen a situation where every question, from every side, met the same barrier. That observation strips away any suggestion that this is routine. It exposes it as an anomaly, a moment where the system is visibly straining under the weight of something it does not want to address. This is where the psychology of institutional power becomes visible. When faced with a sensitive issue, the instinct is not always to lie. Often, it is to redirect, to reroute discussion into channels that feel legitimate but lead nowhere. By placing a minister in front of the chamber who is structurally unable to answer the most urgent questions, the government creates the appearance of engagement without the substance of it. The ritual of accountability is performed, but its outcome is nullified. The frustration expressed by the shadow minister deepens this understanding. Her point is not just that answers are being withheld. It is that the wrong person has been placed in the position to withhold them. The security minister, the one individual with the authority and knowledge to address the core concerns, is physically present yet functionally silenced. This is not coincidence. It is choreography. Power in modern institutions often operates this way. It is not exercised through direct refusal, but through strategic absence. By ensuring that the only voice allowed to speak is the one that cannot meaningfully engage, the government maintains control while avoiding the political cost of saying no. The chair's response, again, is calm and procedurally sound. The government chooses who speaks. Members may resubmit their requests. There is sympathy for frustration, but no mechanism to resolve it in the moment. This is the quiet cruelty of administrative systems. They acknowledge the problem while deferring any solution. What makes this particularly dangerous is how it trains both officials and the public to accept deferral as normal. When urgent questions can be postponed, rerouted, or diluted through process, urgency itself loses its force. Accountability becomes something that always happens later, after another submission, another review, another decision. And by the time later arrives, the moment has passed. This exchange reveals a deeper pattern that extends far beyond this single case. Institutions develop reflexes. When confronted with topics that carry political or security risk, they instinctively narrow the frame. They invoke legal boundaries, procedural roles, and technicalities not because those things are irrelevant, but because they are safe. They allow the institution to say something without saying anything. Meanwhile, those trying to raise alarms are forced into increasingly formal channels. They file urgent questions. They raise points of order. They appeal to precedent. Each step moves the conflict further away from substance and deeper into process. The original concern, the physical, strategic implications of what is being proposed, becomes almost secondary to the battle over who gets to talk about it. This is how accountability erodes without anyone overtly attacking it. No one here declares that security is unimportant. No one says the public should not know. Instead, a maze of roles and responsibilities is constructed around the issue until it becomes unreachable. By the end of this phase, the chamber is left in a peculiar position. Everyone knows that something significant is at stake. Everyone knows that the questions being asked are legitimate. And yet, no one has been able to extract a single meaningful answer. The system has done exactly what it was designed to do when it wants to avoid exposure. It has absorbed the pressure and produced nothing. And that emptiness, that absence of information in a place designed to produce it, is the most revealing outcome of all. By the time the exchange reaches its conclusion, something far more important than any individual answer has been established. A pattern has been exposed. Not through scandal or shouting, but through repetition. The same question keeps arriving at the same locked door, and every time it does, the system responds not with explanation, but with deflection wrapped in formality. This is the final stage of institutional control, normalization. Once a breakdown happens once, it can be dismissed as a misunderstanding. When it happens repeatedly, it becomes a method. What the chamber witnesses here is the quiet transformation of a national security concern into a procedural inconvenience. The mechanism for that transformation is deceptively simple. First, the issue is framed as being within one department's remit. Then, the minister responsible for. That remit is selected, even though the heart of the matter lies elsewhere. Then, when security questions inevitably arise, they are ruled out of scope. Not because they are invalid, but because they belong to someone who is not allowed to speak. This produces a form of plausible deniability for everyone involved. The planning minister can claim legal restraint. The security minister can remain silent without technically refusing. The government can claim it has answered the urgent question. And the chair can confirm that procedure was followed. And yet, nothing of substance has been addressed. This is how modern power shields itself. It no longer needs secrecy in the old sense. It needs fragmentation. By breaking a single serious issue into multiple administrative silos, each with its own limits, the whole becomes unapproachable. No one person is allowed to speak to the entire truth, so the truth never appears. The most revealing part of this exchange is not what is said, but what remains structurally impossible to say. The members asking questions are not trying to extract classified details. They are trying to force a public reckoning with risk. But risk itself has been bureaucratized. It has been sliced into categories: planning, security, process, until it no longer exists as a single thing that can be debated. The offer to resubmit an urgent question captures this perfectly. On paper, it sounds reasonable. In practice, it is a delay tactic. It moves the issue out of the present moment and into a future that may never arrive. And even if it does, the same architecture of avoidance will still be in place. This is not failure. It is design. Institutions that manage high-stakes political and security issues learn over time how to absorb pressure without changing. They learn which levers to pull, which boundaries to cite, which roles to invoke. The goal is not to stop criticism, but to make it harmless. To turn it into a process that can be acknowledged, recorded, and ultimately ignored. The frustration in the chamber is therefore not just emotional. It is rational. Those inside the system can see the machinery turning, and they recognize when it is being used to protect power rather than expose it. That is why voices from different sides converge in this moment. The conflict is no longer partisan. It is institutional. And that is what makes this exchange so powerful. It reveals how democratic oversight can be neutralized without anyone ever having to say no by saying "not me," "not now," and "not in this forum," over and over again. Authority keeps its secrets intact while maintaining the appearance of transparency. By the time the gavel metaphorically falls, the outcome is clear. The questions remain unanswered. The risks remain unexamined. And the public, watching from the outside, is left with the unsettling realization that even when representatives demand accountability, the system can still decide not to provide it. This is not a story about one building or one foreign power. It is a story about how institutions decide what is allowed to be known. And in that quiet decision, made through procedure rather than proclamation, the true balance of power is revealed.